Thank you all so much for joining us here for a panel discussion on consumer behavior and circular business models. As you can see, we've got a very, very exciting set of panelists, and we would like to start by thanking our panelists for taking the time out to be here and to share views on three different areas of work that they're doing. Also, a big thank you to the EU-REI for making a lot of this work possible. I'm going to hand over to Rachna now to introduce EU-REI and also, set a little bit of context on what's happening here today. Over to you, Rachna.
Thanks, Pavitra, and welcome from our side. Can you hear me clearly? Pavitra, Naren, can you confirm?
Yes, all good, all good. Please proceed.
Okay, good. Yes, so I would just request if you can put up one slide of the EU-REI, and then I think we are just good to go. Yeah, so I think by the time Pavitra just put up the slide because I don't see it yet. Most of the panelists are, I think, yeah, maybe they're not fully aware of what we do as EU-REI. So of course, I think this one context of what's happening or what's the progress in India is just to kind of set the context and also just to share with some of our participants who are new as well of how does this web series or where exactly does this work around consumer behavior and circular models could actually take a lead in India. So considering that, Pavitra, could you just go to the next slide? We are called as EU-REI, but the full title is EU Resource Efficiency Initiative. In India, we have been active since 2017, financed by the European Union. In India, we are actually implementing this initiative with as GIZ being the lead of the consortium, but with TERI, CII, as well as ZLC as our knowledge partners. And we have a range of activities or, results of work packages with overall objective looking at fostering sustainable and efficient use of natural resources, but largely to see how do you actually progress on the issues related to SCP, where consumer engagement is also quite closely involved, as well as also looking at a few key sectors, because of course, I think the transition also looks at priority areas and sectors, because you can't just resolve the entire bit or make this entire transformation just by undergoing. So we have, of course, selected some of these sectors and look at assessment scenarios, feasibility, future usage of some of the resources in these sectors. So we have actually covered renewable energy with a focus on photovoltaics, mobility, building and construction, as well as extended producer responsibility, where plastic and e-waste has been our focus of the work. So in these assessment frameworks, we've actually come out with both the current as well as future usage of the resources in India, and of course, looking at the criticality framework, say for instance, with regard to building and construction, or currently what we are undertaking is something on land usage, so looking at land as a resource and looking at soil and sand extraction in there. And considerably with regard to other sectors which are potentially abiotic with a focus around materials like iron, steel, rare earths and other, where exactly does this kind of the growth and the critical frameworks could actually focus on with regard to the change to a resource efficient framework. The other key result is partnerships and networking, where we have been working with EU-India businesses to organize dialogues, as well as also look at supporting business models, as well as partnerships across these sectors and also potentially other sectors which is of priority to the EU side. Then we have also been doing a lot of awareness raising, promotion of best practices, exchange, business dialogues, and engagement with the civil society. And under this result is like these kind of knowledge webinars and all. Since with the pandemic, we just thought, let's continue the dialogue and let's just keep the discussion around the topic, because I think it just needs much more thinking and different set of ideas and discussion across the stakeholder groups as it is presented today with a variety of panelists that we have as well today. So in the last 3 years, we have been able to actually support NITI Aayog as one of our partners to actually have a national resource efficiency strategy, which was released in November 2017. And we also have a resource efficiency policy drafted by the Ministry of Environment in July last year. Something we've actually been doing under partnerships is also to look at adaptation of EU standards to the Indian context, where we also work with EU and Indian partners. And recently, we also kind of just had we would be looking at EU-India Joint Summit, which was signed this year in July, and which actually came out with an entire declaration on EU-India partnership on resource efficiency, circular economy. And this is something, as Pavitra mentioned, the last of our webinar in December would actually focus on taking this engagement forward between the governments and supporting through the initiative across these results as well as sectors. Then we also work quite closely at the national level, also state level with Goa, where we supported the first state strategy on resource efficiency, focusing on marine litter, and again, looking at circular business models specifically for tourism and construction in the state. Next, please. And I think I would just have a few ideas to just set the context, because we have, I think, not undertaken something specifically on consumer, but as I mentioned, these sectors are very closely, at least with regard to EPR, with regard to waste. It has focused quite a lot around consumer engagement, role of standards and all. So I think to begin with, I would just like to mention, and I think it's also mentioned in the note which we prepared on the background note of this session. So basically, I think during the pandemic, we've actually seen this entire, a different closer, I would say, a different relationship with the home, society, and well-being and environment largely, because I think, and most of the audience present today will actually agree that we have started to somehow enjoy spending time with our families, have a different work from home options, and of course, virtual socializing from home. Now, this transition that has happened in 2020 is something which will have a huge impact, and has already made an impact with regard to our relationship, with regard to our patterns of consumption in both positive as well as negative ways. But also, I think these new priorities emerging with regard to, say, for instance, on requirement for building, for requirement for mobility, as well as work from home. I think this will change dramatically how the future will look like. And I think for businesses, this systemic change will, of course, not just only look at building back better, but maybe we'll also look at build forward with a better and a more sustainable future. And I think considering that the consumer engagement is forefront, because I think this pandemic has also clearly brought out the role of an individual consumer and how things within the society could actually shape up if we think of building back in a better and a more sustainable form. So considering circular economy, and I think there are variety of studies and something done by Circular Economy Group as well, there's almost 8.6% of the world is circular. So which means that around 92% is still waste, which means there's a huge disappointing news. But of course, I think that is where a lot of potential still lies, especially on approaches related to SCP. And the panel, of course, will put in a lot of information around these practices and principles. But I think what we have also closely looked at is the recent surveys that have been undertaken, for instance, with Global Scan, where the depletion of natural resources was actually one of the topmost priority, other than COVID, other than spread of human diseases and climate change, which I think makes it very clear that the public opinion around the depletion of natural resources is coming quite strongly. The impact on environment and nature, I think that's what is there. But some of the key findings that came out, especially on the consumer engagement, is actually first looking at accessibility. That people across the world, and this is like a global survey close to 27 countries, and the accessibility has been defined as one of the key areas or elements when it comes to altering the way people think about perceiving their life or the changes that they can actually think about. Second big change, second thing that is being noticed is, of course, affordability, which to encourage uptake of more sustainable behavior, not the other way around of affordability of changing and replacing goods. So basically looking at affordable products, but of course looking at more repairability and durability in these products as we talk about. Then the other bit has been around people are willing to, and there is a logic, there is a sense about this link to environment and this link to the life and livelihoods and well-being. But I think the gap is, there is an aspiration, people wish to contribute, but the actual behavior is pretty different. And I think that's where the role of businesses, the role of transparent communication is quite important, because it actually looks at rebuilding and also engaging consumer in a very different and a positive way. Then, of course, I think the younger generation is the key focus. And since a lot of circular economy business models is not just only about consuming less, but it also is about consuming better. And I think considering that a lot of options and models that do exist is about dematerializing consumption, where there is a need to look at, like for instance, this shift to Spotify or other applications, other forms of entertainment. The physical usage of CDs and DVDs is completely out. So dematerializing consumption with different kinds of platforms, where of course digitalization plays a very key role. And of course, this the youth, the tech-savvy youth can actually be engaged more with newer technologies, and if they are engaged better and made aware to be how exactly do they contribute, and embracing digitalization, innovation, and education, because I think these are things which are also clearly mentioned around sustainable lifestyles. The other big issue, I think, if we just come across, and especially with the pandemic, we've seen the other way around. The growth is about more and more single-use plastic back in the market. And in countries, and especially developing countries across the globe, this use of single-use packaging, especially the small sachets, is a big issue. And I think across the different circular models, there have been approaches to actually look at how do you actually sell a service. And there are models which are actually looking at selling household products by grams and not by packaging. Now, I think these are solutions which are required, and we also heard in a very recent sticky circular economy symposium a few weeks back, which actually had examples from India. For instance, Ample Pack in India, which is actually selling these kind of packaging, which is both, of course, expensive, but it actually looks at system innovation, policy incentives, and of course, nudging the consumer behavior in a very right direction. Other key initiatives, of course, across fashion, and I think some of the panelists would actually mention about it, is of course replacing this fast fashion with something which is more traditional, sustainable, and has more durability. So I think this is certain bits, and considering the EU Green Deals and all, sustainable purchasing choices clearly mention that consumers have to be at the heart of public policy dialogue, which currently is at many times missing. And this this is where at least we just thought an engagement would actually help us build it better. Sorry. And I think lastly, I would just like to mention that these innovative solutions would actually require trust between the consumers and companies, because as I mentioned, increasing transparency and traceability, especially with regard to products who have a higher value at the end of life. This needs to be better communicated so that we can actually empower consumers on taking these decisions better, and also make a better informed consumer choices. And I think lastly, I would just like to add that resilience is something which is, of course, quite a lot coming up in certain models, but a lot needs to be still thought about. Economy as a circular economy which enhances resilience as well as engages with consumers, looks at transparency, localization, it's inclusive as well as it's digital, because I think these are the key factors which can actually bring in a better, more robust transformation to the circular model, as well as a consumer uptake, better uptake of these kind of local regulations and target segments where we are interested to work around. That's, I think, a little bit information from my side to just set the context, and I think we really look forward to hear our panelists today. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Rachna, for that introduction and very quickly, telling us about the work of the EU-REI project as well as some context for today. I see a lot of people have come in since we did the housekeeping slide. So a very quick request again to please keep your microphones muted and to keep your videos off unless you're a panelist. And if you are a panelist, may I please invite you to turn your video on now, because we're just about getting ready to kick off the panel discussion. Annette, Mariana, Nirmal, Pranshu, can I invite you to turn on your video cameras, please? Thank you. So thank you, Nirmal. Thank you, Pranshu. Thank you, Mariana. Thank you, Annette, for being here. A quick introduction. Annette is a behavioral economist and a project manager at ConPolicy, all the way from Germany. Annette is going to be largely sharing work that they've done on a behavioral study on consumer engagement in the circular economy in the EU. Mariana is project manager at the Collaborating Center for Sustainable Consumption and Production. They have started some very interesting work on a consumer insight action panel, which is looking to generate, apply, and test consumer behavioral insights in adopting circular strategies. Nirmal is here, is Senior Vice President, Business Excellence at Zoomcar. Many of you, especially in India, must be familiar with Zoomcar, and Nirmal is here to share some perspectives on subscription models for vehicles. And I think there were four-wheelers largely, and then now maybe a little bit of diversification as well. And we also have Pranshu. I think Pranshu is, again, someone who's quite familiar in the Indian context for us. Pranshu is the founder of Karo, Sambhav, and has worked very extensively in the areas of e-waste recycling. And now, more recently, I think, also getting into plastics recycling. So we are going to try and make the rest of the hour plus that we have a conversation. There are no more presentations. It's just going to be me getting to ask our panelists questions and then to keep the conversation flowing. I would request you to add your comments and thoughts in the chat box as well, and Naren will help us pick up some of those questions and comments for us to use in the rest of this conversation. All right, so just before we kick off, a little bit about what we're trying to do here. Clearly, the circular economy means, like a wide of a product. And, like in earlier conversation that we kicked off decades ago about sustainability, the focus would very largely be on the production side of it, right? But with the circular economy and every stage of the life cycle that it encompasses, that needs to change for that systemic transition to happen. Clearly, consumers have to become a huge focus, because it's us consumers who have to be very actively engaged in moving to and adopting models like rental or subscription and other sharing models, as well as we have a big role to play in what are we doing with products when we see we can no longer use them. Are we going to repair them? Are we going to reuse them for other purposes? Are we putting them for recycling or composting through the right channels, right? So there's a lot of focus that is starting to shift to the consumer. And what we're interested in here today is what form does this focus take, right? What makes the consumers tick? What are the trends we're seeing, and why are or aren't consumers engaging in some of these circular models? And very importantly, what can we do to encourage and enable more circular behaviors? And I think many of you here I also see are from backgrounds in marketing and stuff. And a lot of the tools that we're talking about when we talk about behavioral tools are not new. They've been used for ages, to make us consume or market products to us as consumers in particular ways that were in a very linear form of consumption. But how does that come in when we move to circular models? That's what we're going to look at today. And just a little story. I'm not sure if, this story is just to accentuate the role of the consumer. So also the co-host of this and my co-founder at Infinitive, is also my partner. I happen to be married to him. And a constant debate in our house is how often we should wash jeans. And I said, Naren, you're just being lazy by telling me not to wash my jeans too often. But apparently in the latest jeans redesign guidelines that the Ellen MacArthur Foundation has come up with, along with very key stakeholders in the apparel industry, one of the points that they've actually emphasized on, and I'm reading this out to you, jeans produced in accordance with the redesign guidelines will include an easily accessible label that gives information on reducing washing frequency. Okay, so that's where we are. That's a little story to tell you about, maybe we need more information and we can't just leave it to domestic debates on how often we should wash jeans. All right, with that little introduction, I think I'd like to first ask you, our participants, to give us your opinion on something. So I'm going to ask Naren if we can flash up a poll question before we bring our panelists to talk. Naren, can we have the first poll question? A quick reminder that there are no easy answers or right answers to our poll questions. We're simply trying to understand where you stand with respect to a lot of these very highly debatable topics.
Right. Questions coming right up.
All right. So don't shy away from answering the question, capturing your individual responses in any way. We're just looking to see what the room is thinking, which is so much more difficult to do when you can't see who else is in the room. Question for everyone here is, who is most critical for a transition to the circular economy? Is it we sort of, oversimplify the classification. Is it the producers, which is your brands, your manufacturers, that side? Is it the policymakers, or is it the consumers? I think you have about a minute to answer this, and not 5 minutes as it seems to stay at the moment. So just 30 more seconds to answer the question. I can see our panelists smiling. I will come to you with this question somewhere in the course of the conversation. A few seconds more. All right, Naren, is it possible to end the poll now?
Yes, I just did. I'm just going to flash the results up.
All right, so let us know when you're ready with the results. A quick non-panelists to kindly turn off the video. All right, so we've got our results for the first poll question, and wow, we have 32% of people saying producers, and 22% who are saying it's the government and the policymakers, and 24% saying it's the consumers. That's actually a more even split than I expected it to be. So I'm glad we asked the question. All right, then. So we'll park that there for a minute and start talking to our panelists, and then come back to that later in the conversation. May I begin with you, Annette? You've done a very extensive, been part of the European Commission study, which is, I think, one of the most extensive studies on behaviors and consumer engagement in the circular economy. Do you want to share with us some of the sort of key highlights of the findings? What are consumers willing to engage in the circular economy, and just or is there a difference between what we're saying and what we do?
So thank you, Pavi. First of all, it's really great to be here in this round and take part in all of these panel discussions. And I think your introductions to the topic, as well as the poll question, just really show us where we are, and sort of that we are in a bit of unknown and unclear territory about who do things depend on, who's responsible for what, who has what type of power. And so, yes, our study was probably up to now still consumer facing, the most extensive. It was expensive, but probably not the most expensive study that has been conducted
I think
on
that was
this
just a slip
topic.
of the tongue, Annette. Sorry, that was just a slip of the tongue that came from,
I'm sure
constantly
that
going.
we
But
did shy away from
interesting.
investing all the resources that we were given from the European Union. It was really, so they were like, just what I want to say is that they realized that consumers have a huge role to play. And I personally voted that consumers have a key role, but this is obviously, I'm completely biased towards consumer policy. So I firmly believe in consumers' powers. So what this study showed for the first time is that, especially in Western countries, we nowadays sort of say that we live in a throwaway economy where people just want things quicker, faster, newer all the time. But that didn't, like, when we surveyed people across the European Union, and we surveyed more than 12,000 people in 12 different countries about their attitudes towards the environment, about how is it important what their family and friends do in sustainable behaviors. And what we saw is that many people really do care about these topics, and many people would like to be active and to take the right decisions, and to also have consistency between what they believe in and the actions that they take as consumers. But then what we also discovered is, even though there is this very high degree of engagement and interest in the circular economy, the actions don't really follow, in a sense that, like, there is a vast majority of people that say that they would be willing to repair, but there's also a significant share of people that don't repair any products. Or people who say, yes, I care for durable products and I care for repairable products, but then when it comes down to actually taking a choice in a shop, the price is very important. And I think the key ingredient of our study is also trying to disentangle. So then what can we do to get people to act upon their attitudes? And that was really about providing information, but I think there might be more questions about this part later. So yeah, I think the most important takeaway is that people care, and we need to work on this to really engage with them in the right ways, to give them the type of information and the types of products available such that they can act upon their attitudes and their interest. Papa, you're muted.
Okay, thanks, Annette, for that. And going just from a study to a slightly more on-ground behavior, Pranshu, can I bring you into the conversation here? You've been working a lot on collecting back and funneling e-waste into the right recycling channels, right? Can you talk us through a little bit about what are the channels you are using, and what are some of the trends you're seeing? Are consumers willing to recycle? Are we willing to put that effort in? And clearly, this is in the Indian context based on your work.
Sure. Thank you, Pavitra. So I'll talk first of, it is first of all product dependent. And I would like to first talk about electronic waste. And so the channels that we are utilizing as of today are collection via the informal sector after we formalize them. So most people are today, over 90% of the people are today selling their waste to the informal sector, to the door-to-door collectors, which then again goes through various levels of aggregation and would generally go to informal recyclers. So we end up coming somewhere in between, before the waste goes to the informal recyclers and purchasing the waste from the informal collectors. So that's the first channel that we work on. The second channel, for which I've been trying to figure out an answer and have been unsuccessful for over a decade now, first at Nokia, then at Microsoft, and now at Karo, Sambhav, is the consumer channel, which is enabling people to, be responsible and also participate in channels which brands create, or channels which, for example, we are creating. So there are two challenges that come forth, when we talk of consumers. The first is people wanting extreme amount of convenience. If someone can pick it from my doorstep, only then I am willing to participate in any collection scheme. If you are not coming to my doorstep, whether I have a single battery or a single charger, I am not going to take it and dispose it. And then the second, which is fairly, I would say specific to most emerging markets, is the incentive which is required for even a completely dead, broken, product. So even if anyone has a completely broken mobile phone bought 20 years back, the expectation is you pay them 10% of the value that they paid when they bought the phone or a laptop. This is not true for devices like washing machines or which are very heavy and difficult to store in home. So it again is a product dependent point. So however,
that's very interesting. I think that we expect to be compensated for a mobile phone, but not a washing machine.
No, we do, but because it occupies more space in my house and thus my mind space also, I would like to get rid of it even if I don't get enough money. So
very interesting.
So for smaller IT converged products, it is very difficult to get. And this is, I mean, if I even look at numbers, European recycling numbers, this problem is true almost everywhere. Small items, IT goods are very, very difficult, and specifically in emerging markets, highly pronounced in India, the expectation for money for a completely dead, out of which you can't do anything with it. You can't even sell it to a repair shop. Even that, but no one would really buy it. But still, I would not give it away in a responsible channel. So we are finding this, and the idea is to break this pattern by doing a whole range of awareness programs, which we are trying. But the numbers are dismal, continue to be dismal.
Interesting. We'll come back on those awareness campaigns. Stay with the challenges here for a second. And Mariana, if I could bring you in here. The Consumer Insight Action Panel is divided into sort of 3 clubs focused on apparel and textiles, and then electronics, as well as plastics, right? And tell me if I've gotten this right. What you're trying to do with these clubs is bring together the relevant stakeholders across stakeholder groups to actually help with, naming these challenges and prioritizing them before you look at testing out behavioral interventions. Is that right?
Perfect.
Okay.
It's also amazing to see your interest in the initiatives happening out there and how well you understand them. Thanks.
Thank you, Mariana. So I think what my question to you is, with one or more of these clubs, what are some of the challenges that you prioritized as needing to be solved? I know Pranshu brought up a couple of points and Annette touched upon some as well. If you'd like to elaborate based on your work, that would be great.
Yes, that will be my pleasure. So let me just start by thank you, Pavi, and your team again for the opportunity to be here today. It's a real pleasure to be part of this conversation. Also because behaviors and behavior change is part of my daily work and my passion. So I'm actually happy also to hear to which extent what I'm going to share here resonates with you, and then I hope this is just a conversation starter. No. So as Pavi said, I'm part and I lead the Consumer Insight Action Panel as part of my organization, as part of the CSCP. And the seed to the Consumer Insight Action Panel was this realization that most of the solutions and action taken in the circular economy realm focus on the production side. And we also always felt the consumption and the citizen engagement part really untapped, unexplored. And we were wondering how might it look like if we would engage consumers better, if we would really understand the actual barriers that people face with engaging with more circular electronics or more circular clothing, with reducing food waste, and how can we help that in practice? No? So together with the Finnish Innovation Fund, with Citra, and also as part of our contribution to the European Circular Economy Stakeholder Platform, we launched the Consumer Insight Action Panel. And our key question there and our big challenge is how can we foster circular behaviors in Europe? And so here, it's also very important to have that introduction from Annette. I really appreciate it, because a key aspect of fostering circular behaviors for us is to move beyond positive attitudes. It's to move beyond this reported willingness to change, which we see people are more and more reporting on surveys, to get actual action. So probably most of us are familiar with this term attitude action gap. So you have a positive attitude about something, but you still struggle to translate that into actual behavior and action, which can often be frustrating. And so can we design strategies for helping that actual action from consumers to happen? And can those strategies be based not on assumptions, but on actual evidence? So we also see a lot of strategies to engage consumers are based on assumption. Oh, people need more information. Oh, people only react to financial incentives. And we want to understand in practice on concrete cases, is it really true? Or people might face other barriers. So we might need other types of strategies. So as Pavi said, we focus on 3 clubs: plastics, electronics, and textiles, and we bring different stakeholders in these 3 clubs. Stakeholders are diverse, from businesses, including retailers and producers, policymakers, NGOs, academia, national governments, to jointly tackle certain defined behavioral challenges within these sectors. So within specifically the electronic sector, which is the one I'm following most closely right now, we have focused on 2 specific issues, and then we're going to prototype solutions for those. One is giving back tablets and smartphones. So this aspect of take back, and then looked from the consumer part, how can we foster and help consumers returning and giving back their phones? And not aiming for recycling, I think mostly aiming for refurbishing and reusing phones in order to extend their lifetime. And then secondly, how can we foster repairing? So we are not clear yet if it would be about people bringing products to be repaired or if it's going to be repairing themselves. But those are the 2 main areas of behaviors around tablets and smartphones that we're going to focus on. And a multi-stakeholder approach, because we believe there is a role for other stakeholders to enable consumers to remove those barriers out of the way, so that we don't blame individuals, but we actually foster a more inviting environment.
Right. Thank you so much, Mariana, for sharing that. And I see a lot of sort of overlaps, but also like allied areas of work happening here. For something just a little different, I'm going to go over to Nirmal. Nirmal, you already work on a subscription model, right? So subscription model for mobility, and which I think is becoming, I won't say it's not super common, but I think a lot of the major car manufacturers are already starting to put their vehicles on subscription models, or at least exploring the opportunity of doing that. But yours is a little different. What I want to focus on is the shared subscription. Essentially, can you get someone like me who has a car and who doesn't use it for 6.5 days in a week? And it's, like I own it, it's my car, but 6.5 days it does nothing but sit in my garage. Can I put it on your subscription platform to enable other people to use it while it's doing nothing in my garage, right? So that's the that's where I want to anchor the conversation. So with this particular shared subscription model, right, which goes one step further than even a subscription model, what are some of the challenges you've been seeing? And also you've been doing this for at least 4 or 5 years now. How are you seeing the consumer trends shifting? And well, are they shifting fast enough for your liking?
Hey, thanks, Pavi. Thanks for inviting me to this discussion. Yeah, I think quite interesting to hear all the views that came from Europe and different parts of the country. Also, clearly, there are 3 things which generally affect any adoption, right? I would really think that it's all about awareness, availability, and then affordability. These are 3 things that really matter whether something gets adopted or not. So subscription is a new product for large parts of the country. So awareness is still growing. So it has grown over these 3-4 years that you talked about. Availability is coming through because not just us, there are multiple players who are now trying to provide car subscriptions in the country. And what we really try to do here is, as you said, right, as I think Mariana mentioned about financial incentives to make something happen. So why would somebody be okay sharing his his or her car if there is no financial incentive here? So the logic here is that a car, as you said, a car which is standing for the last six and a half days of a week, if a person is able to share and it becomes useful to another person and you get financial incentive which is reducing your cost, that seems to be very powerful. Not just it's good for the environment, but then it is certainly good for each of us too. And that is what makes people adopt to something like that. So we have seen that improving quite a bit. So what we do, because of the regulations that we have in India, where we have different types of number plates that are used for commercial applications and personal cars. So in your case, the personal car that you have cannot be shared at this point of time because of the restrictions or the regulations that exist in India. But that is not how it is in many of the other countries. I mean, peer-to-peer sharing is a fairly common thing across different countries, right? So we are just trying to mimic that using a shared subscription kind of model here. What we also found is that we feel one of the other problems, which we don't really realize all the time, is that one is, of course, the consumer behavior side of it, where we talked about all these things, right? Awareness, availability, and affordability. But the other part is that lack of technology on the side of the manufacturer's side to provide something like this. A subscription or a shared subscription program is something that is not there in a country because they don't have enough of technology. So we are thinking that we should try and solve that to make it more available all across. That's what we're working on.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that, Nirmal. I will come back to you. Again, on the personal side, but when Naren and I moved to Mumbai from Ahmedabad, we found it necessary to buy a car in Ahmedabad, but we don't really need a car in Mumbai, but we just the whole 6.5 day thing. And we were very keen on putting it on a shared subscription model, but there were just so many, so many things that were not letting us do it on the policy side, obviously, but also just our own behaviors. But we'll pick up on that in just a minute. Annette, may I circle back to you now? You run some, as part of your study, there were really various different methods of trying to understand consumer behavior, particularly around repairing and durability. Do you want to run us through one of the behavioral experiments you set up, and what were some of the key findings from that, and some barriers that were identified through that as well?
Yes, absolutely. So, yes, so clearly one of the points of the study was to highlight the size and extent of that intention behavior gap. Even though it wasn't a theoretical setup, it was about, so what can we do about it? How do we get people to take the right actions, to let actions follow? And so one thing that became very clear from the very beginning, and I think we heard it here, is things need to be easy, things need to be convenient, things need to be straightforward for people to act upon it. If there's any type of friction or barrier to doing the right thing, people just don't do it. They're overwhelmed, they get fed up, and they get disinterested. So starting sort of at the very basic level, if you go out, at least in any European country, if you go out to buy a television or a dishwasher, a vacuum cleaner or a smartphone, or even a coat, whatever, there's no way of knowing which one is going to last better. To some extent, there are some brands that have extraordinary reputation, and there are others that sort of have a cheapish image, and you would just expect that maybe the cheapish ones might break earlier than longer ones. But there's absolutely no way to know which type of manufacturer puts a focus on building a product that is built to last. And so we wanted to tackle exactly that point and trying to abstract from just price quality, but trying to see, okay, how can we inform people, and would they take this information into consideration while shopping if they were given information about how long is this product expected to last? And so in our behavioral experiment, we simulated an online shop in which people were randomized to having to purchase either a dishwasher or a television, a vacuum cleaner, a smartphone, or a piece of clothing. And we gave them actually an assigned budget such that they had a real incentive of, I sort of need to buy the cheapest thing, but then I also get obviously use from using a product for a very long time. So we really built an incentive system that would be as realistic as possible. And then people were shown 6 different products of the same kind, so 6 dishwashers, and they could choose which one to purchase. And in different types of conditions, so some people saw sort of the status quo where you just had no information base to make a circular decision. Whereas in other options, in other experimental conditions, people saw an EU certified label that said this product is supposed to last 5 years or 10 years or whatever the durability was. Or different types of manufacturer claims where the manufacturer said, I guarantee you this is going to last 10 years or 5 years. And the prices didn't change. It was just about giving information that is otherwise not available. And what we saw is that people really take this into consideration. The choices where no information was available and when it was available were hugely different. People care and people pay for it. And I think that was just brilliant to show sort of that there might be an easy fix, and it's just like, all right, people care, but people cannot act upon it because they just don't know what the right action is. And so it clearly showed the potential that there is for informing people in the right way and making things accessible.
Right. And Annette, we've talked about, I think, price and convenience. Those are words that have been popping out very frequently, you know, even in the first like 15 or 20 minutes of this conversation. Would to put a price to, I mean, you know, like we talk about willingness to pay a lot and whether we are measuring willingness to pay in the right ways, right? So was that one of the focal points of the experiment, and you were able to figure out if people are willing to pay more for that product? And, you know,
yes, we were. So eliciting that willingness to pay was key, because obviously the strongest signal we can send to business and to the free economy is that there is a business case here. You can make money by making better and more durable and easier repairable products. So we found willingness to pay, and obviously, again, it depends on the type of product, between 20 euros for a standard vacuum cleaner, more if it lasted longer. And I think the increment was like, if the vacuum cleaner is expected to last 2 additional years, there was 20 euro more willingness to pay. But then for large items, so dishwashers and televisions, this willingness to pay was like 150 euros. So sometimes a really significant share in addition. Because, I mean, it links back to what was said before. Item in your home occupies space as well as mental space. It is the absolute worst nightmare in any household if your washing machine stops working or if your dishwasher stops working. So people are willing to pay to have this psychological hassle solved for them.
Very interesting, and I think I'm picking up again that you know, when we have these conversations, we're talking about durability, repairability for electronics and for plastics, but there's so much of a difference between these. There's a need to further segment these products, whether it's to look at how you can recycle them better or how you know what people can pay for great durability in them, right? I think that's sort of coming up again, that you can't just look at one bucket like electronics or plastics. I think we have a fairly well-rounded understanding now of what some of the challenges are. So I think we should. Pranshu, I think as part of one of the initiatives that you've done one of the largest awareness programs in India on getting consumers to give back and recycle their e-waste. Do you want to talk us through a little bit about what was some of the key messaging behind it, and, you know, how were you trying to you know, get the consumers' attention? I think it says e-waste hum le jayenge, and it's very much in this you know, the allusion to the old Hindi movie classic that most of India is familiar with. Do you want to talk us through some of that? Actually, I think you're on mute.
Yeah, so I can talk through multiple campaigns that we have tried to do. The initial idea, and I'll build upon also the work that I used to do at Nokia earlier. And some of the very critical things that came out was we need emotional arguments rather than rational arguments. Unless we go into emotional arguments, we can't win the dialogue, because the whole idea that I need a very large amount of money before I give away my electronic waste is just so embedded. So people are not willing to give away even as I said, a broken charger. Even for that we find resistance, or a battery which is completely worn out. Even for that, the moment you say, okay, large brands want to collect it, so the viewpoint, and I'm now going into a lot of research that was done, is that, okay, if you are taking it back, then you will probably counterfeit it and sell it back in the new product to me. So that is, so I mean, how do you solve that argument? And that's why, because you're going to put it in the new product, so I need to be paid very high for this completely broken whatever I have. And there were a lot of studies which were done that can we go the rational argument route, and almost all the studies said the moment you do it, you have lost it. And that's where the whole idea for us emerged, that let us take a different route where we are using an emotional argument. And I, talking directly to another adult, cannot do an emotional argument. So maybe we have to take children's route. So encourage a child to go back to their families, talk about this, have a dialogue with their parents, convince them, their relatives, and that could be a route. And one of the biggest focus areas, the way we have driven this messaging, is via building capacities of school children. And again, there is a definite route to that, building capacities of teacher who then create lesson plans based on these messaging, and we support them in creating these lesson plans. And then over a period of a few years, these are implemented at a school level. Others, the sort of direct messaging with people has been, okay, we have used certain times campaigns where the focus is that this waste is valuable, and why is it valuable? But again, the moment you attach value to waste, so people say, okay, then I need more money. So I was earlier asking X, now I need X plus Y. So actually that, at Nokia, we tried these campaigns and it did fail drastically, because the moment you say that your waste is valuable, recycle it. Okay, if it is so valuable, increase the price.
Right.
I need more. So what we are now doing is we have taken a very, the latest campaign is focused on a very Bollywood-based theme for last 2 years, because it allows us freshness. So what we are trying now is more of fresh messaging. So any new movie comes, we take a take on the character, and with the character talking that, okay, why don't you recycle? It is important. And this is at least clicking. I don't know. I mean, results are still far. Again, a big challenge. And I would like to hear Annette on this, on how do you get, how do you measure results of these campaigns? Because the impact is such, the duration is so long for the impact to be seen, that it's very difficult to even know, because sometimes what we measure is that you have done a messaging, and what is the collection today? Well, the person may not have waste today. It may come 2 years down the line. So it's very difficult to even measure the impacts of some of these campaigns. In plastic waste, it's a very different scenario, because in plastic waste, people don't see value in the waste. So the willingness to participate in a recycling program of packaging is significantly higher. So versus the electronic waste. So yeah.
Some fascinating points, Pranshu. I think some of these are pretty intuitive, but I think it's good to get like slightly more nuanced perspectives from your actual work on the ground. I know you wanted to hear from Annette on this, but before we come to Annette and Mariana again, Nirmal, I want to bring you in here, because ads was something that, and messaging was something that came up in our conversations as well. So when you guys started, when Zoomcar started putting out the shared subscription program, my understanding is that there was nothing like this in India at that, back then, or maybe even now, right? Mindset shift, like how are you tackling that? And I don't know if there are lessons in that for some of the other areas, other circular models and behaviors we're speaking.
Yeah, so it's not just then, it's even now. It's even now that I don't think there is another program like ours in the Indian market, at least. There's no shared subscription as such. And to just help you understand the real sense of it, right? Think of a battery or the size of a mobile phone, and think of an electric vehicle. The battery in an electric vehicle is going to be loads bigger than what we currently are talking about in a mobile phone. I'm not talking about a mobile phone battery being the only e-waste that we need to recycle, but think of the magnitude of that problem, right? So now, and as you said, nobody's going to give back a two-wheeler, which is a very common usage in India. Electric two-wheeler, I'm going to give it back for free. It's never going to happen here, right? They're actually going to expect so much money for even if the electric batteries are not working. I'm sure there are quite a few old lead acid batteries which are waiting just for this. And so when we were trying to get to this, we were very clear that on the vehicle side, it's a huge mindset shift for them. So people consider vehicles as their babies. So essentially, they think that I'm taking her for a drive. These are kinds of things that you see, right? So we tried to play a completely opposite thing on it, saying that, okay, we had a fairly large ad, a TV ad, which talked about sharing your life for 6 months, or like somebody's proposing to a girl saying that, can you be mine for 6 months, 12 months, 24 months? So essentially talking about subscription being a normal way of life and not, and this is like provocative, right? It's not the normal thing that is happening. It's provocative. You're provocating them to say that, and especially in an India kind of scenario where we talk about marriage, family as being the most important piece. So here really you're going provocating them, saying that 6 months, can you be together? So that is the kind of thing that kind of drove that for us. And of course, post that was a big boost that you got. And then post that, after the pandemic, we saw that people were actually moving away from a lot of shared cab hailing kind of usage, right? They started driving on their own. So that is another time when we saw a large uptick on the demand.
Right. Provocative messaging, and well, it seems to have worked for you, but I come back to Mariana. I think it's time for a poll question. There seems to be a lot of activity in the chat box. Unfortunately, I'm not really keeping up with it, but thank you to some of our panelists who are, answering questions as they come. Naren, can we flash up another poll question, please? Okay, so this one's like fairly easy. It's just asking about what have you done? Like which of these have you participated in? Accessing products through rental subscription models, listing your own products on sharing platforms so you can, give access to others. Ensuring that you're repairing a product to extend its useful life instead of, completely replacing it. And we're not just talking about, cosmetic repairs here. And then buying products that are specifically intended and designed to be circular, greater durability, modularity, designed for disassembly, and so on. And also, do you participate in responsible disposal or recycling at the end of life? That's essentially asking you, do you give your e-waste to Pranshu at the end of life? But yeah, so I think this one you can pick multiple options. Naren, are we okay? All right, thank you so much for answering the questions. When there are more than 3 options on the screen, I have difficulty figuring out what answer is more popular. Okay, and this one has, so 46% of you have said that you repair a product instead of, to extend its life instead of replacing it, which is great. And I think the second and third sort of closest options behind those are responsible disposal at the end of life and buying products that are designed for circularity. I'm gonna actually ask our, I want to comment on these results for a second here. Is this, you know, are these behaviors expected? Were you expecting something different while you were, you know, answering the questions yourself?
No, on repair, I would have imagined actually higher numbers, significantly higher numbers. Repair has been a way of life, at least in India, just because, you know, there are, it is affordable to repair. I mean, that's the prime reason. It is affordable. We did not have, you know, at least in earlier times, or, you know, the per capita incomes have gone up now, but earlier it was always better to get things repaired than buy new. So the last one, I'm quite surprised to see that people have said responsible disposal, but maybe it is true for this group.
Right.
Yeah, I think some of these are specifically this group, because repair of a product, I actually do not recall when was the last time I did something like that.
Right.
I actually change it. For example, think of a phone or anything, right? You have a problem or anything that happens, you exchange it on an e-commerce platform. But I don't recall when I went to a place to repair this.
Right.
I'm surprised to see this.
Right. And I think, well, I have a little bit of a story to add on here. I cracked the screen of my iPhone, I think 3 or 4 months ago. And well, actually, I don't know if you can see the cracks now, but it kind of looks like that. And I've just been using it. I'm like, I can still see everything on the screen. Yeah, whereas Naren said, buy the next iPhone. And I'm like, no. So, I mean, it's a little surprising. I mean, I think some of these behaviors are also about what the companies are doing in terms of being able to exchange those products. Like Nirmal said, you exchange rather than repair, right? And that seems to be one trend that's beginning to happen. Any other thoughts from the rest of our panelists? If not, I'm ready with the next question.
I was just going to say, I actually was surprised with the repairing results. I felt it was higher than I expected. I do myself, but I see there is a lot of challenge, maybe because in Europe, service provision is more expensive, much more expensive. And depending on what you're repairing, for example, your smartphone, just like you said, Pavi, I had a similar experience recently with my husband. And if you give back your smartphone, you may need to do that for a couple of weeks, depending on where you want to repair. And this not only the price, but also the whole, let's say, transaction costs and involvement can be challenging. So price-wise and time-wise. So actually interesting to see that that repair seems to be something more usual among our participants.
Right. And I'm wondering if, I haven't actually looked at all the participants, but I'm actually wondering if that speaks to the diversity of participants that we have here in India and the EU, as well as, I think, from around the world. Because I think, Pranshu, you're saying you expected the repair numbers to be higher, and Mariana, you're saying you expected them to be lower. So maybe that just talks to the, speaks to the diversity of the participants that we have here. Very interesting. Thank you, participants, for sharing your thoughts, and thank you to the panelists for commenting on them. Mariana, maybe I can stick with you for a minute here. In terms of the work that you do with the clubs, you talked about the challenge framing a little bit. Do you want to talk us through what are maybe some of the interventions that you're actually planning to test out? Because these you are going to test out in real world conditions, right? So take us through, maybe 1 or 2 of those interventions and how what you're expecting to find. And I think maybe there's some reference back to what Pranshu was asking also about, you run campaigns, but how do you measure their impact, right? So you're running the behavioral interventions. What are you running and how are you measuring its impact?
Yes. So I should say, Pavi, that we are not as far as heavy interventions yet as part of the circular economy project that we do. And I'm going to explain why. We have a 3-stage approach. So first of all, it's very important for us to do the insight part, which means understanding how people really tick and what might be the most promising ways to intervene. So not jump into assumptions. Before then, we design those interventions and apply. In the clubs I mentioned, in the plastics one, we are more advanced on, let's say, collecting insight and design interventions. In the electronics one, we are in an earlier stage, but I can share interesting insights already collected in both, because I think the insights are, let's say, the seed to start thinking of promising interventions. So in the Electronics Club, as I said first, we're looking to giving back phones as one of the main focus of the work. Also repair, but let me focus on the take back or give back here, because here we have done a greater insight review and see what already exists out there before we actually go out and talk to consumers, observe consumers, and develop the interventions. And we see that there are millions of smartphones and tablets stored at home, especially phones. So in Germany alone, there are over 120 million old mobile phones stored in homes. And at least half of the people have never done anything with their old phones besides leaving them in the drawers. Maybe half of the people surveyed in Europe have done something and either given it to somebody else or sold it back or brought it back to a retailer, but it's probably the reality of half or less of the people surveyed in Europe. And when looking into, let's say, the pillars of behaviors that we map with regards to the psychological capability, which means we have the knowledge to give back our phones, we see that half of consumers surveyed are not even aware that this is possible. So people, when they need to buy a new phone, they don't even know, or not everybody, but at least half, that this is possible. So here, awareness and knowledge indeed play a key role. When thinking about motivation, research shows that people have nostalgic relationships with their phones, with the things that are left there, like photos, like messages, often are afraid of security and privacy aspects. So this also hinders them to simply sell that back, especially because they feel the money might not be enough for that. With regards to the opportunity, and especially the money opportunity, so things that are external in the outside world, we see that Apple, Samsung, Google are already offering certain take-back schemes. It's not mainstream, but we see some attempts out there, and we want to understand those better, because if we are to prototype a better solution, we need to see what are the shortcomings. And we see in several of them, there is a money paid back if you want to buy a new phone, but often how much money is paid is not clear when you do that deal. So how do you close a deal to give back your phone if you don't know exactly how much you would get back? So that also might be a barrier, how much you actually get. And then finally, we realize social norms take time to establish in society, and we believe a lot on this aspect of social norms. So research has shown that the longer take-back schemes are in place out there and get improved, more people get to know about it and more people get to accept it. So I think this aspect of longevity of those programs and that turning into norms that make it feel normal, accepted, is very important. So things that exist from the last couple of months, we imagine, oh, why are they not working? Maybe we need to let them settle, work on them further for them to bear fruits. So these are some insights that we are going to act upon when thinking about our interventions to improve take-back schemes, or let's give back funds. And then quickly on the packaging part, there are two main focus. One is sorting packaging at home. So we realize there are packaging, especially for packaging that have different parts, often like yogurt cups have 3 parts. People have to disassemble that to then put in different bins. This is often not known. So yogurt sometimes has even a paper part, the lid, the actual cup. So we're going through people's trash and studying that and seeing to which extent this is actually not separated. And then discussing, is this an issue of design, or is this an issue of better communicating how it should be done? Is it rather an issue of having infrastructure at home? Or this might be different depending on the actual target audience that we are going to focus on. So on the segmentation aspect that was also raised here in the chat. And the other aspect is packaging that has less resources, that is a bit lighter or has recycled content. And we are working with a retailer in Germany that faces issues in putting those packages in the market and actually getting them bought. People tend to go to the older ones that they already know. So we are discussing with them, how can we help them foster? They have tried social media campaigns, hasn't worked yet to put those packaging on the spotlight for people. So we might need interventions that are really close to the consumption point.
Right. Thank you, Mariana, for sharing those. Very, very interesting. And I think I'm going to go over to Nirmal now a little bit about, we've talked about convenience, price points, and, all of these as factors to take into account when you're getting, consumers to adopt more circular behaviors. But my concern, if I were to put, if I were to put my clothes on a subscription model or put my car on a subscription model, is what condition it's going to be in when it, will people drive my car as well as I do? And I imagine that that's something that that when it comes to things like the sharing economy, and it's okay if I'm just borrowing something to share once, but if I have to put mine on a subscription model with Zoomcar or any other player, how do I know? And how are you making sure the other consumers are behaving well with sort of my product that I'm willing to share with them? Can we do more than just awareness? And how is Zoomcar particularly tackling this part?
Yeah, so fundamentally, we are a technology company. We believe technology has to solve some of these problems for us. Right? This is about creating trust for the sharing, the person who's sharing on the platform. So now, unless that person is ready to share, there is no platform at all. There's no supply, no demand is going to come, and this all this talk about circular economy within sharing will not happen. So our firm belief in technology led us to work on something which we call as driver scoring. So essentially, what we do is we have a device which works with the vehicle, understands how a person is using the car, which really means that a person is driving poorly. It is captured by the device, and we use algorithms to understand whether this behavior is rampant. A person is repeating this again and again, which really says that. So if he or she is doing it once, that's just a matter of maybe there's something on the road which caused it. But if the behavior is rampant, it really tells you that that is this original behavior. So what we do is that we have our technology which incentivizes and penalizes people for good and bad usage. So, for example, if I share my car and somebody used the car poorly, the person who used poorly will be penalized at the end of the trip, or will find it costlier the next time he's trying to share a car. So, just trying to ensure that good behavior is rampant in the system through technology. That is something that we try our best to do.
Very interesting. So the technology knows the product, and I think that's the point that you brought up about creating trust, and it's come up earlier in the conversation as well. I think that's something that keeps coming up, and I think in some other conversations more about traceability and transparency technology when you're especially in purchasing decisions and how you have the right information to make consumers choose better. That's something that comes up in other conversations. Not so much here today, but I think I'm going to go over to Annette now. So we already started talking about, we started talking about some of the solutions, but do you want to tell us, as a study, what are some of the recommendations, particularly the policy recommendations that you came up with to get consumers to participate more in choosing durable products and repairing?
Yes, so I mean, it really comes down to what we spoke about. It is about boosting that engagement that we already see and giving people the ability to act upon it. So really issuing information about the circular credentials of products is absolutely key. And then secondly, I wouldn't want to rank them, but then the convenience point is important. So especially when it comes to repair decisions, it needs to be straightforward how people can access repair services, what are the steps they need to take, and make it hassle-free. Prices are important, so there has been a recommendation on sort of creating financial incentives around repairability and durability. However, I'm not sure whether that's it. I think it needs to be more focused on, I think Mariana mentioned, we need to work on the social norms. And affordability is definitely key. Some people, and it has been mentioned in the chat, feel that making durable choices and repairable choices often go hand in hand with purchasing the more expensive good or the higher quality good. And I think we need a rethink here to some extent where possible, that you can't underestimate the potential savings you might be making in the long run compared to purchasing a more expensive item right now. And so I think there's something about education here and just making people focus on on the consequences of their choices. So needing to purchase something twice or even 1.5 times over a certain lifetime might get eventually more expensive. And then it is about making subscription models, for example, accessible, because obviously a subscription has the advantage of splitting a potentially large payment up front over time into smaller chunks, which also has a huge effect on the affordability and the accessibility of such services to different groups in society. And then something that we didn't really show in the study, but again, what Mariana mentioned is social norms. It is so important that we rethink about how people are behaving. So, like, it needs to be cool again that you have an older phone and not the newest. It needs to be fashionable. And I mean, in Berlin, it definitely is fashionable to have used furniture. I do not own a I just bought a couch that is new, but that will be the single new item in my home. I am entirely furnished with people from my 95-year-old grandpa, stuff that I found on the streets and stuff that I found on like eBay, used stuff traded in the house. And that includes the bed of my baby. All of my baby clothes are like in 3rd or 4th generation. And it's fine. Yes, my baby is not dressed in the style I want him to be dressed, but he is dressed every day. He's not cold. He looks cute. And so we really need a rethink about this, that it is not because I can't afford to buy all new clothes and furniture. It is an active choice, both in terms of style as well as in terms of sustainability. But there obviously is a lot of backlash against this. Like my family has absolutely no understanding for my living choices. So I think there's a huge job here around making these types of decisions easy for people that want to take them, like giving them the confidence you can make these choices and it's fine, and even it is the right thing to do. It is kind of like these choices need to come down to like, which restaurant are you going to? Are you going to the one that is completely empty right now and sort of looks dodgy, or are you going to the place that is bustling? Everyone wants to queue there. I mean, obviously you're going to queue because it just seems like the safe and right thing to do. If everyone wants to be eating there, I want to. So it's about this social proofing. Knowing what other people do is a recommendation for me, what's the right thing to do. So everyone just get your grandparents' furniture, take them over. It'll revamp your style in a way you wouldn't believe.
Amazing, Annette. Love some really great anecdotes as well as what we should all be doing. Pranshu, I see you nodding away in agreement to everything Annette's saying. How do we make recycling of e-waste really cool? Or do you want to share some more thoughts on what Annette was saying?
No, I think I mean, these are living examples, and I think the context is so critical, Annette, like you just said. Context in terms of how much dialogue are we really doing, and it all starts with dialogue. So one of the things that we have been continuously, because sometimes it's very difficult to measure the output. Ideally every campaign, every activity should have some measurable outputs, but because this is so difficult a space to really measure, and consumer research always not always, but in most cases tells a lie, that because people will always say that they want to do the right thing, though they may not. On environmental research, this is a common problem, that the answers, if you give 3 choices, people will always pick up the right choice. But when it is to be done, you won't see that as a behavioral action. So one of the things that I think we are trying to focus on is how much context can we create, and Annette talked about it beautifully, that it's really about those context. If these things start living in conversations, daily conversations, today 2 people were talking, tomorrow 10 will talk, at some point in time it is bound to convert to actions. But if we are not even having conversations, it is highly unlikely that we have any action whatsoever at any point in time. I think one thing which I can say, and owing to just the sheer number of webinars, I mean, if you see in the last 6 months, the sheer number of webinars that have happened in India on circular economy, the number tells you that, okay, people are starting that. So the equation is moving from why should I do it to how should I do it. And that is important. We may still not be there, but I believe at the pace we are going, and more people like Annette and Mariana are needed, to really practice, not just say, but also practice a lot of these things. I think we will, in this decade of action, hopefully solve this problem.
Wonderful. Thank you, Pranshu. And I think for me, you shared a lot of webinars, and this is already the third webinar in our series. And I think, what always is sort of great for me to hear, sitting in the role of moderator, is how we're always talking about you need to contextualize things, but there's so many common threads, right? Of how we can do certain things. And I hope we're able to bring more of the sharing back and forth between the EU and India through this series. I'm going to ask, we're very close to the time to wrap up. Maybe we'll wrap up in the next 5 minutes. I'm going to ask Naren to flash up one last poll question, and then we'll do some final thoughts from our panelists. Naren, can we have the poll question? So I know we said I'll be measuring willingness to pay in the right way, but we thought, okay, for the sake of this panel, let's ask if you're willing to pay.
So just mentioning a cool initiative that I came across about making secondhand stuff cool. There is an Instagram account that is called Found on the Street, made by two just regular girls from Berlin who completely dress just with stuff found on the street, and they've become fashion icons. So if anyone wants to follow, they've grown bigger than they thought they could.
Excellent. Thank you for sharing that, Annette. All right, I think we're nearing the end of the poll. And while we wait for the poll results to flash up, I'm going to ask our panelists to weigh in on something that's been a debate for decades. We're not the right answer clearly, but would love to hear your thoughts on, what is the role of the consumer? As consumers, do we drive businesses and demand for the better products and services? Or are we restricted by the choices that the system, which is the businesses and the governments, have on offer for us? I know this has got very varied answers. Nirmal, I see you smiling. I don't know if it's because you guys put a subscription model out there before anyone even wanted it. So, I would love to hear your perspectives on, as consumers, are we drivers of that change? Or are we just restricted by what's available?
So I firmly believe that all of this depends on financial incentives for everyone, right? So this is a free market. So eventually, this will be done by companies and agencies when they have a financial incentive, and similarly will be done by consumers when they have an incentive. And this is basic economics, I'm sure, right? And the only thing that a government can do is facilitate something like this and make it easier for everyone. That is what I think would be the real role that each of us will play.
Nirmal, just out of curiosity, when you put out the shared subscription model, I from what I can tell of people around me, there was no demand for it. So is this one of those build it and they will come sort of? What was really driving you to do that? Because you saw the business opportunities.
So there, if you really look at why Zoomcar was doing this, it's not because we want to be a part of the circular economy, right? It's almost because we see that the demand for car sharing is spread across, and we want to have cars which are all in each street to be available for a sharing. And to make that happen, we had to use a peer car sharing kind of model. And here, because of the restrictions which are there from the government, you use a subscription as a model. That is what we are doing, right? And the logic of using this is not to make it more circular. It is actually to be meeting the demand that is there and becoming asset-light. That is the reason why we are doing this. It's not because of anything else. So I believe that the incentive for the company is to become profitable. And that is why the company is trying to do this. And that's exactly how it is going to be. Like each company is going to do this because it is the best, good for business. And eventually, because of that, and it will also be good for the consumers. That is what will drive this.
Great. Thank you, Nirmal. Can I invite our other panelists if you want to, take a stab at this whole chicken and egg sort of question that deserves its place at the end of this discussion?
Just adding directly to what Nirmal said, so the European Commission is thinking about changing the consumer policies, really changing the laws to ingrain durability and to avoid practices sometimes called the planned obsolescence of things. So on the one hand, I would support that because it really sends a clear signal that to manufacturers, you can't go on this way, you need to do something. But on the other hand, I do believe it's a free economy, and it would be much better if people were sort of auto-convinced by themselves prior to even having to issue all this legislation and having to enforce it, that manufacturers knew that this is their business case. And so I do believe that consumers have a huge role to play. I mean, it hasn't worked in many other markets, especially around sort of bringing ethics on the table, and also showing that tobacco is harmful and that it's uncool to be smoking nowadays. So I think it's about changing these social norms such that producing anything else just isn't viable anymore. So it needs to play together.
Thank you, Annette.
Yeah, I do agree it's a chicken or egg question. And when we had our chat earlier, we realized that. So I think it's not an either or question. I see also from the beginning when we saw everybody seeing the different stakeholders with a high role, almost 1/3 of each. I think it's actually showing a shared responsibility, proactivity from businesses, from consumers, and from policymakers to make that possible. So I think the ideal situation is where we have both bottom-up and top-down initiatives, and one pushing the other, inspiring the other. I wouldn't like that we as a certain stakeholder to see the other pushing or making us act. But I do think, so Annette was talking about the free market. I actually, I might challenge that assumption because I asked myself to which extent the market is really free or gives us really free choices, because I think most of the mainstream choices are often made not to last that long. So I asked myself, to which extent are we really free in the current market to also consume more sustainably? In certain situations, easier than in others. I think it really also depends on the sector that we are talking about. Maybe clothing and furniture, it might be a little easier. Maybe on electronics, things that go beyond also our technical knowledge might be more challenging. Mobility as well might be more challenging. So it depends also more on infrastructure, on availability. So I would see a combination of both, but I see a role from policymakers and the industry to make that the whole situation easier. I often see us trapped into certain challenging and uncircular situations, and I don't think we should aggregate from society, become really detached from society in order to be able to live more sustainably.
Right. Thank you very much. Just a quick, sorry, Pranshu, I'll come to you in just a second. Has just dropped a link for the feedback form on the chat box. It will be absolutely wonderful if you could help fill that up. We have more of these knowledge sessions, and we'd love your feedback to see, if you're aiming the content the right way. It will be very, very helpful if you do that. I think we also had a couple of questions from the audience. We'll get to that in a second. Pranshu, I'm going to hand over to you for final comments before I get into the question.
Sure. So, this chicken and the egg situation has been hanging over us for such a long time. And where I get worried and anxious, honestly, is we are at the cusp of, the dead end is very near. I mean, if we talk of the decade of change, we are, a lot of dialogue is today happening that post 2030, there would be, we have already crossed the point of no return. So at the pace at which things are organically moving, or even with all the push and pull that is happening, they are moving. do we really believe that the change will be enough in within this decade, and especially in the next 5 to 7 years, because that is the time when real change needs to happen. And the distance to be covered is just too vast if we continue taking this approach of organic growth. I don't know, what kind of big change, how will the very, very large change which is required will come, and how do we have so many more sustainable consumers? But that's a thought that I'm struggling with. That yes, it will happen at some point in time, but that point is so far, and the grim reality is so near, that how do you make it all work together?
All right. Thank you for sharing those thoughts, Pranshu. I noticed we're running out of time a little bit. So I think one of the questions for you, I hope we can direct that to you after the panel, and we'll also try to share some of those insights on social media, with your answers. We are conscious of time here, and I'm just going to do a very quick wrap up. I honestly don't know how to wrap up that session, but I think, the short version of that would be, clearly from the studies, with your work, and Mariana, with some of the stakeholders that you're bringing together, and you're out some test out interventions, there's clearly a business case for providing more circular products and services. And we, while there's a lot of awareness that needs to be created, the convenience and the price points factors constantly keep coming up, and we have to figure out how to solve for them. And I think what also popped out for me was not to look at things as electronics or as e-waste, but to segment them so much further to see that, people want to be paid for a mobile phone, even if it's a charger, even if it's in broken condition, but they're happy if you just take away their washing machine. That was quite insightful for me. I love the point about, like some of the incentives and penalization around behavior that can be structured around technological solutions, like the one that Zoomcar is doing. And I imagine it would be, like promote all around sharing and subscription sort of behaviors if we knew the products we're getting can be trusted through several methods, including technological solutions. And I think what sort of really at the end, the debate, and there's no conclusion to that debate, but Pranshu, I love what you said about, all of us need to make that move, right? And it has to be really, really quick. So it's not either or, but how best do you orchestrate all the stakeholders coming together and do the pushes and the pulls to make circular change happen fast enough. That's my sort of wrap up for the moment, but we're going to try to synthesize all of these discussion points into some insights. So, make sure we have your contact details or follow us on social media so you get access to some of these. And with that, I'm going to wrap up by saying thank you so much to our panelists for being a part of this discussion and, staying so actively engaged in the chat box as well. I hope I will get a chance to read some of these things. For supporting this work and helping us make this happen. And thank you so much to the participants. I think this is one of the most active chat boxes that we have had. Thank you to everyone for making this a wonderful discussion. Please make sure you've given us your feedback so we can keep improving our work as well. And on that note, I will say final bye-byes and sign off.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Everyone, have a great day.